Welcome to Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and truly excited about this particular program. For me, it goes back 30 or 40 years. We're here to talk about the subject of mass incarceration, and we have two distinguished guests to discuss this, and truly could think of none other that are more qualified to engage in this conversation. Who we have is Dr. Alan Colon. He's a professor of African World Studies at Dillard University. Thank you, Dr. Colon. And we also have Dr. James Turner. He's the founder of the African Studies and Research Center at Cornell University in New York. Thank you, Dr. Turner. We appreciate you. Dr. Turner is here. They are here. Of course, Dr. Colon is here at Dillard, but Dr. Turner has flew in. They have a lecture that's going on. It's called Crime and Punishment, African Americans in a Post-Racial Society. It's going to be Tuesday, March 20th through Thursday, March 22nd. And of course, you can catch it, I'm sure, on Dillard's website. And we're going to give you more information. And in fact, we'll put it on the Health Issues website. We want you to participate in that. Dr. Turner is going to be speaking 3 p.m. on the subject mass enslavement to mass segregation to mass incarceration. It's going to be at 3 p.m. Tuesday, March 20th. But again, it's going to be going on all the way through Thursday, March 22nd. But we're going to give you a preview of a lot of this now today. Let's deal with a little bit about the background, because I don't think people know who you guys are. Let's start with Dr. Colon at Dillard, but I want to add some things with Dr. Turner. Some of the things that he has done. He initiated the African Studies and founding member of the Trans-Africa Organization of Southern African Liberation Support Community. He was the chair of the North African delegation to the 6th Pan-African Congress. He had conducted research on the political philosophy of Malcolm X that was part of used on Eyes on a Prize, the PBS series. He has literally been literally all around the world in the subject of Pan-Africanism and truly authority in black nationalism and so forth. If you could tell us a little bit more, Dr. Turner, about your background.
Well, Chris, thanks for having us on this program. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you and the work you do. I grew up in New York City, was raised in a period in the late 1950s, early 1960s as I came to young adulthood, when Harlem was a fervent place for political discussion and dynamic organization in the community. Malcolm X had recently been appointed the head of Temple No. 7, which was the major mosque then. But there also was a tradition of Garveyites and radical labor organizers, Black Women's Organization. Maya Angelou first cut her teeth with Ruby Dee and others in these Black women's arts group. So that was my early bringing, and I was introduced to the ideas of black nationalism and Pan-Africanism in the community by what used to be, Al, you might remember, what we used to call the street lectures. There was an area in the center of Harlem on 125th Street in what's now Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. Every Friday, Chris, every Saturday, there were black people on each corner. They had their corner, and they were lecturing on politics, economics, culture, world events. That's where I met people like the late Dr. John Henry Clark, the world-renowned historian, Dr. Ben Yosef Jokanan. And so I was educated in that environment, and it stimulated in me a recognition that we black people have to go through a transformation of our consciousness and our identity to overcome the vestiges of slavery and its its negative effects on us. So I carried that with me into college, and it just matured.
I'm blown away. If anybody knows who John Henry Clark is, and really just to have an idea of the deep history, that is awesome. And Dr. Cologne, right here at Dillard University, which I didn't know. You know, we've connected with Dillard somewhat, but we've been trying, and we're going to develop more of a relationship because we do researchers here, and we're excited that you put together this program.
Well, thank you. We're excited about it too. I wish that our excitement stemmed from a more positive source, because the excitement is rooted in our understanding of the disturbing realities that we face now. This is, I think, a very perilous time for us, and it is a time of peril that it seems in our collective consciousness we need to be more aware of. We're not sufficiently aware of. I want to go back just for a minute and claim him. We grew up in the same place. I'm a New Yorker as well.
Really?
But we didn't know each other until the 1960s. I met Dr. Turner in 1969 when I worked at Brooklyn College, and we've been colleagues ever since that time. My feet got wet in the Black Freedom Movement. I guess coming out of my family background, there was always a cultural awareness and sensitivity, and so I got good exposure there. Came up in, as James was alluding to, a very exciting time in the nation, in the world, and certainly in New York City, where we had the benefit of being exposed to certain things that we could have elected to have ignored, but we chose to get absorbed into. And my feet further got wet when I went on to college in the South, and the Black student movement aspect of the African American freedom struggle had taken root, and that did not escape me as a student at Virginia State College in Petersburg, and so we got involved in the desegregation efforts. And then as for myself, I went on and graduated to other things, and ultimately got connected to the Black Studies movement. And that, by definition, in terms of what Black Studies was originally conceived to be, had to have gotten me involved in some other grassroots and other kinds of liberatory projects. Right. So this wasn't about sitting back and contemplating on the great kings and queens of Africa, not to denigrate them, right, but we are talking about moving forward. And so that meant some study and some work, and some study and some work, and organizing and study and work. And that's more of the front end of it for me. The latter end of my story brings me to New Orleans and to Dillard University in 1998, and I've been there since then. And coming back to this disturbing reality that we have, there are two conflicting trends that are very important among many others. One is the mass incarceration of African descended people, much greater proportions than our numbers in the general population. And this is ruinous to us as a people. It destabilizes our families and communities. It is harmful to the nation as a whole if people would really pull the covers off of the problem and be honest about that. This is happening for some complicated historical reasons that maybe we can get into, but it's happening at a time when we hear a lot in the media and in public discourse, in academic circles, about this being a time and a period where race isn't important anymore. We're in a post-racial stage of the development of American society. I think that the idea of post-raciality needs to be challenged. It needs to be questioned. How can that actually be in an absolute sense when you have so many things happening to this group of people you don't want to use the word race to apply to, who are experiencing so much underdevelopment, so much inequity and inequality in the society, and it seems to be happening quite systematically. And so we have been motivated by this alarm clock that has gone off to try to look at this problem a little more closely and see if we can come up with some better ideas and some better practices for dealing with it. And that's what prompted us to convene the Symposium on Crime and Punishment in African Americans.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Turner, from mass slavery, mass segregation, apartheid, to mass incarceration, all connected?
Yes, all connected. There have been some scholars who have argued that we could develop a kind of periodization of African American history and experience by looking at these different stages of mass incarceration. In fact, a former sociologist once said we could look at the process of the 3 Ps: plantation, project, prisons.
Wow.
You know, this kind of continuum. We have always, by virtue of our experience that has been introduced into this country as massively incarcerated people. Slavery is the most massive incarceration you can endure. Every aspect of your life is dominated and controlled by the plantation bosses. It also, I might say, Chris, set up the basis for racial stratification that is very much involved in the kind of conflict that we see now going on. For example, Africans were at the bottom of the plantation society. Just above them were landless or small farmer, poor whites who were made the drivers. So you immediately have established a wedge between these two. Then there were the middlemen and the people who handled moving goods to market, and then the plant owners, you see. And I think this relationship between these lower class whites and blacks has been under-recognized. This is where the antagonism, they were most involved in policing these black people. They had the least to benefit, but they had the most to do in keeping these black people repressed on the plantation. So you get this warping of relationship, a sense of closeness, but also a sense of antagonism. And I think we see this play out in the prison systems today, where it's the same, essentially, working class, lower class, former farmers who now are not farming, but who have to work in prisons, and the antagonism between white male construction of white masculinity being based on domination of black males. And that's why you find you can so quickly have combustible conflict between black males and police. Because when these white police roll up on you, I'm going to deal with them, and they feel it immediately to prove that they're not afraid of these black people. They're going to buckle them down. So you get this kind of conflict, and then you get black males trying to say, man, get up off me. Give me, you don't got to get in my face like that. So there's these conflict of masculinities, if you will. The black masculinity quest for freedom, the white masculinity being constructed on keeping these black people dominated.
From a historical perspective then, if we looked if we go all the way back to Egypt, there was always this tension between the Northwest Semitic people coming into Egypt, and it lasted, if we look all throughout Middle Africa, it was this tension, and then particularly when we look at the European colonizations, there was this consistent tension in colonizing Africa. Same thing, we go through slavery, and today, George Will had a column. It was nationally syndicated right here in the Times-Picayune, where he related aptitude to genetics, that it was a direct relationship. In other words, can we ever get away from this idea that blacks are genetically inferior, and therefore that tension should always exist, and whether it's slavery or mass incarceration, we're just dealing with a true fact?
Well, you're dealing with a fact, you know, of domination of whites over, but the notion of genetic inferiority is part of the rationalization of that system, you see. What whites have had to ask is, how do you justify what you're doing over this period of time and to these people, which is inhuman? And even they could not escape that, because while we were, the massive enslavement comes on the heel of, or in some sense concurrent with, the so-called periods of enlightenment. They're supposed to be enlightened to that. It is also the period of the spread of religious wars and the movement of Christianity around the world, providing the Bible as the central seminal text for morality. And here they are committing the greatest sin. Slavery, in the final analysis, is a crime against humanity. It is one of the massive crimes against humanity that have yet to be addressed. How do you rationalize that? So they create this false thesis of these people being less than us and therefore outside the pale of God and deserving of this treatment. You know, it's a shallow thing, but yet and still it becomes a rationalization. Now, American society, American culture is cultivated by the matrix of these forces, the oppression and the rationalization, you see. And it is cultivated and generated this psychology or culture of racism in the country that has to be confronted. If we can overturn the mass incarceration based on race, we will have gone a long way institutionally of setting a new stage for America's future.
Question, and you spoke about it before. Slavery was the use of labor. Mass incarceration is the use of excess labor.
Yeah.
Some thoughts?
What do you do with a population that might be defined as surplus? A population that is undereducated, does not have the privilege of accessing the means of production during these days, which have turned from when this country originated to agricultural production to an industrial base, and many of us flock to the cities of the North and Northeast and the West to get into industry to improve our livelihoods, and that has played out. We've seen the drying up of industry, and now the society is rooted in technology and information systems and delivery. And if you have processes by which people are systematically excluded from access to participating in that and living fuller, more holistically developed lives for themselves and their communities, then they will tend to be seen as burdens on society. That's not a new idea. The idea of the white man's burden goes back several hundred years. In fact, I'll just add parenthetically as a footnote to my colleague's statement a moment ago, that in human history, the idea of race didn't even come about until it was generated as a divisive notion to justify systems of superiority and subordination that coincided with the enslavement of African people in the world across the oceans. And so now today we've gone through these various changes, these various cycles, and the idea, the question of black labor is still at the center of the conversation. Initially, it was black labor that would satisfy the labor shortage in the colonies of the so-called New World that Europeans colonized. What do you do to make this land that you have now conquered profitable? Well, you put people to work. The people were tried. Native Americans didn't work out. Europeans who came over weren't sufficient in number, and for other reasons didn't address the labor shortage problem. And so let's go to the east. Let's go down further south from Europe to Africa, because there are a number of reasons we can justify this. And so rationalizations were promoted. Now, what are the rationalizations? We hear the same rationalizations. These people don't want to work. They don't have the brain capacity to be educated. They are intellectually inferior. They were born this way natively. They don't have the same capabilities that we have. And so there are new faces put on, or new terminologies put on the same kinds of arguments that were offered before. And if we're not sufficiently educated, we don't stay abreast of them. You can take a sign down that says no colored here, or this is the white water fountain, but once the sign is delivered, you can suffer the illusion that there's no more problem and you have ready access to any and everything that the society has to offer. But as we were speaking earlier, if you do any measurement of quality of life among African Americans, we experience the least of the best and the most of the worst in terms of quality of life measurements. And so if you have a people so situated and so conditioned in a society as African Americans are, then what do you do with them? I would suggest that one of the first essential questions to get at that is to ask African Americans, what do you want to do? What do you want to happen? I think they call that self-determination. We've never exercised that sufficiently. That's not other people's fault. That's our fault as much as anyone else's. But now, again, we're back at the question of black labor or black surplus labor. And so what do you do? One solution certainly is to warehouse them.
Question. Okay. Flip side, somebody may say, okay, so be it. You're incarcerated, not doing well in school because you don't have the aptitude. Nobody's starving. So none of y'all are dying from starvation. You're getting fed, whether in the prison or outside. Your preachers are only preaching prosperity, so everybody's running behind cars, clothes, rings, and things anyway. There's no morality. What else are we to do with y'all?
Well, you know, I want to come to that, but I also want to go back, Chris, if I can, to the reference you made to George Will. I'm going to go look that piece up. But it's interesting that is brought up as a well, if black people were so incapable, why did white people trust their children to be raised by them? If Africans were so incapable, why did Europeans bother themselves to go 9,000 miles and travel months carrying cargo dangerously across the water to cultivate their cash crops? Who were the people who invented and improved on the various gins and mills and equipment that sustained the plantation? Who were the artisan class that sustained and built this economy? You know, rice cultivation was not indigenous here. Who brought that? The Africans did. Indigo and clothing and design was not done here. Who brought it here? The Africans brought it here. You see, the Europeans, even when they were supposedly living at their higher point in the middle period, were living in essentially what were stone caverns that they call castles, without running water and toilets. They often went months without shower or cleaning themselves. So one can't talk about, if you want to characterize the people, look at them. Now, what leads George Will to have some of this seemingly credibility is the ignorance that white and black people have about the genius and intelligent production. We have this young Dr. Ben Carson, who is the leading neuropediatric surgeon from Chicago, but he links to the tradition of Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who did the first open heart surgery. And, you know, we go on. It was black people who separated the blood plasma so it could be preserved for blood transfusion. And we can go on from things like hydraulic pumps to the street lights and the steam engines and telecommunications. But that's what you do when you rob people of the knowledge of self and you rob the kids of this country of the full knowledge, then you can suggest these distortions. But I would remind you, a little over a generation ago, the Japanese were talked about as the same thing, with these so-called caricature pictures and so forth, and being unintelligent. Jewish people were projected as sort of scavengers and plagues on the human family. Now they're seen as the preferred group. This is the distortions that we have to confront, and this issue of mass incarceration allows for us to raise these humanist and social issues about social justice that are critical. And when we say that, well, the ministers are not concentrating on, you know, social issues, then we need to make them accountable. But there is I would say, this issue of mass incarceration is stimulating not only a national dialogue and conversation, it is producing a social movement. It has hit a nerve in the black community about disparities in sentencing and in arrest and in no future and policing. And I would only add, when you say people come out of prison that they're not starving, they're not homeless, many of them are, because they're being released now, and the rules are they're disqualified from getting college scholarships. They can't get loans to get their lives back on track. They're not subject to food supplement supports. They cannot get public housing. And so it has many pieces, and it's related to these broad social issues.
This is the issue of our time, and I know we're running like about 30 seconds. Let's deal with this issue real quick, a few seconds. If it was little green white people or little green purple people, I think we should have the same fervor and intensity. Would you agree?
I would agree. It's an issue of what kind of society you want to have and how much do you value justice.
Dr. James Turner, we are excited. Dr. Alan Colon, this is a time to fight with everything that we have. Crime and Punishment, Tuesday, March 20th, Thursday, March 22nd, Dillard University. Catch Health Issues on the web, healthissues2010.org, or Dillard University's website. Fight as hard as you can with everything that you can. Chris Sylvain, thank you. Please come on, Dr. Colon. We'll have you back again and again. We want to just really blow this up. And this is the issue. This is